Two uniformed men escorted a silent black man before the court, their laughter echoing off the polished wood, their taunts swallowed by his stillness. But that was before he laid an FBI shield upon the judge's bench and fractured the room's smug reality into 1,000 silent pieces. The bailiff, with a voice worn thin by routine, called out the name, Elias Thorne, barely lifting his eyes from his paperwork. A soft ripple of curiosity disturbed the courtroom's stale air. Yet no one stirred until a tall, sharply dressed black man in a subtly wrinkled charcoal suit rose from the rearmost bench. He began a slow, deliberate journey down the central aisle, his every step measured, exuding a profound calm. He carried no briefcase, was flanked by no lawyer, and had no one at his side. It was just him. In the back, a pair of deputies nudged one another. "Is that our guy?" one murmured. "Has to be," the other snickered back. "Look at him. Probably one of those sovereign citizen types, about to lecture the judge that the law is merely a suggestion." A stifled laugh escaped the second deputy, loud enough to draw a few curious glances. Elias remained impassive, his expression a placid mask, almost as if he had witnessed this very scene unfold countless times before. Judge Alistair Finch, a man whose thinning hair was meticulously combed over and whose voice boomed with the manufactured authority of a late-night radio host, adjusted his spectacles and peered down at the file. "Mr. Thorne," he began, the rustle of the page filling the quiet room, "you stand accused of failure to comply with a lawful command during a routine stop. Is that an accurate summary?" Elias's response was crisp and even. "That is what the document alleges." "And you've chosen to appear without legal representation today?" "I have no need of it." More muted chuckles emanated from the back row. The judge cast a fleeting, irritated look toward the deputies, but held his tongue. A palpable tension now hung in the air, not enough to shatter the proceedings, but just enough to make every person in the room keenly aware of its presence. "Very well," the judge droned on. "This seems to be a minor infraction. We can resolve this matter swiftly. Mr. Thorne, do you have anything to state before we proceed?" Elias took a single measured step forward. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, toward the inside of his jacket. One of the deputies in the rear straightened instantly, his hand hovering instinctively near his service weapon. Elias paused, letting the moment hang, then withdrew a sleek, laminated credential and placed it with a soft click on the polished wood of the judge's bench. "My name is Elias D. Thorne," he stated, his voice unwavering and clear. "I am the Regional Director of Internal Affairs for the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The courtroom was plunged into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Judge Finch stared, unblinking, at the shield, his mouth agape. The deputy who had been ready to draw his weapon sank back into his seat, his jaw slack. His partner's eyes were fixed on Elias, as if he had just watched a man phase through solid matter. "You're with the FBI?" the judge finally managed to utter. Elias stood motionless. "Internal Affairs. My division oversees investigations into misconduct, specifically within departments in the southeastern region, including those that exhibit a pattern of body cameras mysteriously failing during traffic stops." In that crushing silence, you could hear the faintest whisper of shuffling paper, a single nervous cough, the infinitesimal sound of a pin dropping. The judge cleared his throat, a dry, rattling sound, and leaned back, his authority seeming to shrink with the motion. "Perhaps you would be willing to join me in my chambers for a moment, Director Thorne?" Elias gave a slight shake of his head. "I would prefer everything remains on the official record. I am a firm believer in absolute transparency." One of the deputies, the one with the shaved head, rose to his feet. We had no idea who he was," he stammered, his voice a barely audible thread. Elias turned his gaze upon them, not with aggression, but with a cool, analytical focus. "You never asked," he replied. That silence, however, would not last, because behind the closed doors and gaping mouths, information spreads with the speed of a wildfire. And this particular fire was about to race all the way to the top. It was just past 10:30 at night when Elias steered his car off Highway 90 near Port Cadence, Louisiana. He had spent the entire day on the road, making quiet visits to small, out-of-the-way departments across the Gulf Coast, departments that had been flagged for their inconsistent use of force reports and, more pressingly, their suspiciously high rate of body cam malfunctions. His rental was an anonymous silver sedan, a deliberate choice for its utter lack of distinction. Elias never broadcast his identity. He was a student of quiet, unnoticed observation. He was en route to a modest motel on Cypress Creek Lane when the night behind him erupted in a storm of red and blue lights. He exhaled slowly, a long, weary sigh, as he decelerated and guided the car onto the gravel shoulder. His rearview mirror framed the approach of two officers, both white, both in their mid-30s, one of them bald and already brandishing a high-powered flashlight. They approached not with caution, but with swagger. The bald one rapped his knuckles sharply on the driver's side window. "License and registration," he commanded, his voice clipped. Elias lowered the window part way. "May I ask the reason for this stop, officer?" "License and registration," the officer repeated, his tone sharpening with impatience. "You failed to signal your last lane change." Elias's eyes flickered to the small dash cam mounted near his mirror. "I am quite certain that I did." The second officer materialized at the passenger window. "You got something you're trying to hide in here?" he chimed in. "No," Elias answered, his voice a study in calm. "But I would like to clarify whether this is a traffic stop or if it has become an interrogation." His question was not well received. The bald officer leaned closer, invading his space. "Are you giving me an attitude? Step out of the vehicle." "I have not refused any command. I simply asked for clarification." "Step out of the car, now." Elias remained still, handing over his driver's license. It read Elias Thorne, a resident of Montgomery, Alabama. No mention of the FBI, just a clean, valid ID. It wasn't enough for them. "Where are you headed tonight?" the first officer demanded. "That's confidential." "Confidential? You can't say or you won't say." Elias met his gaze directly. "Federal protocol." It was that one phrase. That single phrase seemed to detonate something within the officer. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" he snarled. "You think you're above the law?" Elias offered no reply. The second officer wrenched the passenger door open. "Get out of the car now!" Elias kept his voice low and steady. "This stop is no longer being conducted lawfully." But they were past the point of listening. Both officers grabbed him, pulling him forcefully from the car. He offered no resistance, yet they still twisted his arm behind his back and slammed him down onto the gravel shoulder. With a knee pressed firmly into his back, one officer let loose a string of curses, while the other radioed in a refusal to comply. Elias did not cry out. He did not beg. He simply stared at the sharp stones beneath his cheek, committing every single word they spoke to memory. What neither of them knew, what neither could have possibly guessed, was that the moment those lights had flared to life, Elias had activated a miniature audio recorder concealed within his coat pocket. It was a reflex born from years of understanding precisely how encounters like this often unfolded for men who looked like him, especially deep in the South. By the time he was processed at the local station, they had already written their hasty, self-serving report. It claimed he had become verbally combative and had refused to disclose his destination. It made no mention of their own escalating questions, no note of the unnecessary force, and certainly no camera footage to back any of it up. When Elias requested the arresting officer's badge number, he received nothing but a cold, dismissive glare and a sneering comment. "Don't you worry, you'll have all the time in the world to ask questions in court." He was left in a holding cell for the night, denied a phone call, denied any chance to speak with a superior. His only companions were the echoing quiet of the corridor, a single flickering fluorescent light, and the memory of the officer's smug smirk, the look of a man who believed he had just spoken the final word. But it was not the final word. It was not even the beginning, because the courtroom they were so eager to drag him into wasn't just a venue for pressing charges. It was the stage where the real trial was about to commence, the trial of them. The silence that fell over the courtroom after Elias placed his FBI credentials on the judge's bench didn't just hang in the air. It solidified, becoming a suffocating presence. No one dared to move. The confident smirks from the back row had vanished, replaced by masks of disbelief. The deputy with the shaved head sat frozen, his eyes darting between Elias and the shield as if he were looking at an apparition. The judge cleared his throat, but the sound was thin, fragile. "Mr. Thorne, are you asserting that you are an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation?" Elias's gaze was unwavering. "I am not asserting, I am. You are welcome to verify my credentials with Director Samuel Pierce's office, or with the Office of the Inspector General in Washington, D.C. One of the court clerks, a woman named Clarice who had seen 3 decades of drama unfold in this very room, rose slowly to her feet. "Your Honor, shall I make that call?" "Yes, please, do so immediately," the judge replied, his relief palpable. Elias stepped back, granting them the space to unravel their own mistake. The entire room was a tableau of suspended animation, every eye locked on the unfolding scene. Even a small child in the gallery had ceased his restless fidgeting. One of the deputies, the one who had hauled Elias from his car, whispered to his partner, "No way! This has to be a bluff." The other leaned in, his voice strained. "That shield looks real. That ID looked real. What if this is real? Then we are royally screwed." Elias heard every syllable. He said nothing, his attention fixed solely on the judge, who now seemed to be physically shrinking behind the massive oak bench. 5 minutes later, Clarice returned. She clutched a small notepad, her expression grim. "It's confirmed," she announced, her words dropping like stones into the silent pool of the courtroom. She didn't even spare a glance for the deputies. "He's with FBI Internal Affairs, Southeastern Division. 27 years of service. His rank is authenticated." The stillness returned, but this time it was laced not with mockery, but with a spreading stain of humiliation, visible in the judge's darting eyes, in the shallow, panicked breaths of the deputies, in the sudden speechlessness of the prosecutor. It was Elias who finally broke the silence. "I did not come here seeking a spectacle," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "I did not even come here to lodge a formal complaint. I was on an off-the-record assignment, assessing departments currently under federal review. I did not volunteer my credentials because I was under no obligation to do so. I provided my driver's license, I remained composed, and I obeyed the law." His voice never rose, but it commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. "I was then assaulted, thrown to the ground, and detained for hours without just cause. My rights were systematically ignored, but I have documented every word, and I am intimately familiar with every single procedure that was violated." The judge leaned back, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Director Thorne, I am not here for your apology," Elias cut in smoothly. "I am here to request an immediate dismissal of these fraudulent charges and to insist that both arresting officers be placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a comprehensive federal inquiry." The prosecutor started to speak, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. "Granted." Both deputies stared, dumbfounded. "You're suspending us? Just like that?" the bald one exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. Judge Finch did not reply. Elias turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "This was never about me," he said. "This is about every single individual you have treated as if they were insignificant. Every citizen who did not have a federal shield to present. I do, and I still found myself face down in the dirt." One of them stepped forward, pleading. "Look, we didn't know who you were, all right? If we had just known—" Elias held up a hand, halting him mid-sentence. "That," he said, "is precisely the problem." But he was not finished, not even close, because while his badge may have silenced a room, the truth was still buried beneath a mountain of falsified paperwork, blatant lies, and the body camera footage that had so conveniently ceased to exist. The courtroom emptied with a sudden, frantic energy, the gallery spectators scattering as if they had just witnessed a hazardous event. The 2 deputies remained near the exit, their faces pale and their futures suddenly, terrifyingly uncertain. They just stood there, trapped in the crushing realization that a line had just been crossed, from which there was no return. Outside, the thick humidity of a Louisiana morning clung to the air. Elias didn't pause. He walked directly to his rental car, settled into the driver's seat, and finally, allowed himself to release a long, slow breath. He took no pleasure in moments like these. They were not victories. They were heavy, somber reminders of yet another failure in the system. Down the road, at the small Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Marcus Sterling was behind his desk when the call came. "FBI?" he repeated, cradling the phone against his shoulder. "You're telling me that man was FBI?" His deputy, Eva Rostova, stood by the door, her arms crossed, her expression a careful blank. She had read the arrest report earlier, and something about its sparse, aggressive language had felt wrong. "Yes, sir," the voice on the phone confirmed. "Elias Thorne, Internal Affairs." Marcus rubbed his temples. "So 2 of my deputies arrested a senior federal investigator and dragged him through court without so much as running his credentials." "Yes, sir." He slammed the phone down and glared at Ava. "Why the hell did nobody tell me he was FBI?" She simply raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps because no one treated him like he was." Back at the courthouse, Judge Finch convened a hushed meeting behind locked doors. No recorders, no minutes. Just worried whispers, reddening faces, and a desperate scramble to control what might soon explode in the press. Elias, meanwhile, was already back at his motel. He sat on the edge of the bed, his laptop open, a secure line buzzing. The voice on the other end was calm, direct. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Elias replied. "But they are not." "Give me the situation." He laid it all out. The pretext of the stop, the immediate aggression, the body cams that were never activated, the overnight detention. The voice on the line sighed. "Is this the first complaint out of that department?" "No. We've had 3 others in the past 18 months. All of them were dismissed. One of the complainants moved out of state shortly after." "Then it's time to make this official. Begin the full inspection." Elias nodded, a silent affirmation. "Do you want me to maintain a low profile?" "Not anymore." Later that day, Officer Corbin Vance, the one with the shaved head, tried to salvage the wreckage. He appeared at the station, attempting an air of nonchalance, but the tension in his posture and the way he studiously avoided Ava's gaze betrayed him. He knocked on the sheriff's door. "You have a minute?" Marcus didn't bother to look up. "Make it fast." "Look, I didn't know who he was. If I'd known—" "I don't care if he was a sanitation worker or the ghost of Elvis Presley, Corbin," Marcus interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "The man didn't make a single move without giving you an opportunity to de-escalate, and you still hauled him in like a common street thug." Corbin stepped further into the room. I panicked. "He started talking about federal protocols. We've seen guys flash fake badges before, trying to play tough." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes hard as stone. "And when he handed you a valid state-issued license, you just decided to throw procedure out the window?" Corbin had no answer. Marcus leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what is about to happen if the Department of Justice sends a full team down here?" Corbin stared at the floor. "I messed up." Eva, who had entered during the exchange, crossed her arms. "You didn't just mess up. You put this entire department under a federal microscope. And frankly, maybe that's exactly where we need to be." Corbin looked at her, stunned. "Are you serious?" "I'm tired of reading arrest reports that don't align with the evidence," she shot back. "I'm tired of watching people leave this building more broken than when they arrived." Marcus remained silent, his jaw tight, the phone in his hand feeling heavier than ever. He was thinking about just how many secrets were about to be dragged into the light. But if they imagined the worst was over, they hadn't yet seen the file Elias Thorne had just opened on his laptop. A file containing a long list of names, dates, and damning red flags that stretched back for years. Elias sat at the small motel desk, his fingers a blur across the keyboard, his focus absolute. He never worked from a place of emotion. Emotion was a variable that clouded judgment. He was, instead, methodically constructing a timeline, a latticework of facts. He knew precisely what was coming next. He had seen this dance play out too many times. The frantic scrambling, the convenient excuses, the sudden and inexplicable technological failures. He opened the department's official communications portal and submitted a formal, professionally worded request for the body camera footage from the night of his arrest, complete with specific timestamps. He didn't have to wait long. An email arrived less than an hour later, its tone clipped and defensive. We regret to inform you that the body camera footage from the incident on May 14th is unavailable due to an unforeseen technical malfunction. We are currently reviewing our maintenance logs to ascertain the cause of this failure. Elias leaned back in his chair and exhaled a short, sharp breath through his nose. It wasn't a sigh of frustration. It was a sigh of confirmation. Another piece of the pattern clicked into place. Another red mark in a folder that was growing thicker by the minute. He then placed a call to the DOJ's Regional Evidence Liaison and requested a cross-check on the department's body cam software history. 10 minutes later, he had his answer. "They've reported 6 critical outages in the last 10 months, the analyst on the other end read from a log. And every single one occurred during a stop involving a Black or Latino subject. Never during training exercises. Never during traffic citations issued to white motorists." Elias showed no reaction. He just kept typing. At the department, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken dread. Officer Vance sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. Across the room, Eva Rostova was deep in the digital archives, pulling up case files that had lain dormant for years. She opened one from last December. A young man stopped just 3 blocks from his own home, claimed he'd been manhandled, filed a complaint. The body cam, it noted, had malfunctioned. She opened another, same story, and another. Her eyes narrowed. Did they really think no one would ever connect the dots? She murmured to herself. In a small office in the back of the station, the IT technician, a quiet man named Leo who preferred to remain invisible, received a discreet message on the internal chat. "Hey, check the camera server logs for May 14th, the Thorne case. I need to know who accessed those files before they went missing." Leo hesitated. He hated being dragged into departmental politics. But his curiosity won out. He typed a few commands, ran a trace, and the answer appeared almost instantly. Vance, Corbin, accessed twice, once 2 hours after the arrest, and then again the following morning. The log showed a manual deletion, bypassing the standard review flag. Leo stared at the screen, a knot tightening in his stomach. He printed the log, slid it into a plain manila envelope, and instead of sending it digitally, he walked it over to Eva's desk himself. She opened it, her jaw setting into a hard line as she read. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. Leo simply nodded and walked away. By the time Elias Thorne walked into the department the next morning, wearing the same charcoal suit and carrying a small folder, the officer at the front desk looked at him as if he were the human embodiment of a Category 5 hurricane. Director Thorne," the man stammered. We weren't expecting you." "I'm not here to create problems," Elias said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "I am here to confirm patterns." He walked directly toward the operations wing without waiting for an escort. People instinctively moved out of his path. He knocked once on the sheriff's office door and entered. Marcus Sterling looked up, the exhaustion evident on his face. "I trust you received our email regarding the footage." Elias placed the folder he was carrying on the desk. "I also received the server access records." Marcus didn't touch it. "Someone entered the system," Elias stated, "and manually deleted the camera logs. This occurred after the arrest but before the arraignment. Would you care to venture a guess as to who that might have been?" Marcus rubbed his tired eyes. "We're conducting an internal review." "No," Elias corrected him, his voice still calm but now edged with steel. "You are not. I am." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I would advise you to have Officer Vance's badge and service weapon prepared for collection by the end of the day. My team from Internal Affairs will be on site by the end of the week." Marcus offered no argument. He didn't even raise his head. But as Elias stepped back out into the hallway, he knew that Vance wasn't the only one who had left a trail of fingerprints. This inspection was no longer about a single night. It was now about everything they had tried so desperately to bury. By Wednesday morning, 2 black SUVs with government plates had pulled into the rear lot of the Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Office. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, just a quiet, imposing presence. Elias stepped out of the first vehicle. He was joined by 2 agents from Washington. Isla Reyes, a compliance strategist with a gaze that could cut glass, and Silas Croft, a digital forensics expert who rarely spoke but missed nothing. They were not there to cause a commotion. They were there to methodically uncover the truth. Inside the station, the entire dynamic had changed. Deputies who once walked with a confident swagger now huddled behind their monitors, speaking in hushed tones. Sheriff Sterling looked as if he hadn't slept in days. The only people moving with purpose were Elias and his team. Isla commandeered the records room, demanding disciplinary files, traffic stop statistics, personnel reviews, anything and everything that created a paper trail. Silas, accompanied by the IT tech Leo, disappeared into the server room. Leo, looking relieved to be out from under the weight of his secret, granted him full system access without a word of protest. Elias sat with Ava in a small windowless office. She had a laptop open, filled with a dozen windows of old reports. Her expression was one of intense concentration. "They all read the same," she said, gesturing to the screen. Subject pulled over, claims of unprovoked aggression, body cams conveniently offline, vague and dismissive write-ups. No follow-up. Elias nodded slowly. This isn't about one officer making a bad call. It's about an institutional culture. It's about what gets ignored, what gets concealed, what everyone else is taught to accept as normal. She angled her screen towards him. "Look at this. May of last year, a man stopped on his way home from work. He claims he was ordered out of his car for no reason. No citation was issued, no arrest was made. But the official report states he was non-compliant." Elias scanned the text. It was the same tired, boilerplate language he had seen 100 times before. Down the hall, Isla entered Sheriff Sterling's office without knocking. "I require your department's complete training manuals on use of force, de-escalation protocols, and body camera operation policy." Sterling, looking utterly defeated, simply pointed to a large filing cabinet. "It's all in there. Take whatever you need." Isla opened a drawer, scanned the first few documents, and let out a small, exasperated sigh. "This is 4 years out of date," she stated flatly. The sheriff said nothing. In the server room, Silas was working at a blistering pace, cloning hard drives, extracting camera logs, and reconstructing deleted video files from backup caches the deputies didn't even know existed. He soon found 2 video files labeled incomplete. He flagged them immediately. One of them, captured by a patrol car's ambient microphone, contained audio. It was barely a minute long, but it was more than enough. "You have something?" Elias asked when Silas handed him a pair of headphones. Elias listened. The audio was distorted, but the words were chillingly clear. "Where are you headed tonight?" "That's confidential." "Confidential? You can't say or you won't say? Federal protocol." "You think you're above the law?" Then, the distinct thud of a car door being thrown open, a rush of movement, the scrape of boots on gravel, a muffled grunt. Elias looked up. "This is enough." He walked directly to the sheriff's office where Isla was still sifting through outdated folders. "We are issuing a full compliance hold," Elias announced. "Effective immediately, no officer from this department is to engage in any field operations until our review is concluded." Sterling leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "You're shutting us down?" "Temporarily," Elias replied. "Your dispatch will remain active for true emergencies only. But as of this moment, your department is under direct federal supervision." Sterling exhaled slowly through his nose. "Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our reputation?" Elias stood motionless. "Do you have any idea what your inaction has already done?" The door clicked shut behind him as he left. Downstairs, deputies actively avoided his gaze. Eva met him at the bottom of the stairs. "I pulled the complaint logs," she said, holding out a file. "There's a pattern in the dismissals. The majority were marked unfounded, without a single witness interview ever being conducted." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Who signed off on them?" She handed him a list. Corbin Vance's signature appeared over and over again. He folded the paper, slipped it into his coat pocket, and turned towards the exit. "Good work," he told her. Ava looked almost taken aback. "Do you think any of this will actually change anything?" Elias paused at the door. "That depends," he said. "Do you?" But change was no longer dependent on internal paperwork. It now depended on what the town itself would do when everything was brought into the light. And by the end of the week, they would have no choice but to face it all. By Friday morning, the story had bled beyond the courthouse walls. Local news channels began reporting it, first in small, speculative segments. FBI official allegedly arrested in disputed traffic stop. Then came the audio clip, grainy, captured by the patrol car's microphone. But the words were unmistakable. And finally, the phrase that seemed to hang in the air, federal protocol. It was no longer just a line from a police report. It had become a question, a symbol of a deeper unease. At the Cypress Mug, a group of old-timers debated over steaming cups of coffee. "I'm telling you, they pulled that man over for nothing," one said. "Thought he was just another face they could push around." "Well, if he didn't show them his ID," another started. "He did. His license was clean. But even if it wasn't, that's no way to treat another human being. I don't care who he is." Across town, at the small community center on Magnolia Street, parents gathered in an impromptu meeting after school. They were weary of coaching their children on exactly what to say and how to act during a traffic stop, weary of explaining that being respectful was not always a guarantee of safety. By late afternoon, a town hall had been called. It was short notice, but the room was packed. People arrived tense, their faces a mixture of anger, confusion, and a desperate need for answers. The mayor, an older man named Wallace Thorne, took the podium, his hands visibly trembling. "We are aware of the ongoing investigation," he began. "We are cooperating fully with federal authorities, and I assure you, we will be making significant changes." A woman in the back stood up. Her name was Miriam Dubois, and her own son's complaint against the department 2 years prior had vanished into thin air. "Are you going to reopen all of those old cases you dismissed?" she demanded, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are certainly looking into that possibility," the mayor replied evasively. "No," she countered. "Don't look. Act." A wave of applause, scattered at first, then growing stronger, swept through the room. Elias stood near the back wall, arms crossed, observing, listening. Eva arrived midway through and found a spot beside him. "I didn't think this many people would come," she whispered. "They always do," Elias replied. "Once they're no longer afraid of the silence." One by one, citizens approached the microphone. A teenage boy recounted being stopped and searched while walking home from football practice. A single mother described being pulled over twice in a single week and questioned about whether the car she was driving was actually hers. An elderly man shared a story no one had ever heard about being pulled over, handcuffed, and then released without a word of explanation back in 1989, just because. None of these stories had ever made the news. But tonight, in this room, they were being heard. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sheriff Marcus Sterling walked to the podium. The room fell silent. He looked older, more vulnerable. "I have been in law enforcement for 31 years, he began. "And I would be lying if I told you I haven't failed some of you." He paused, his gaze finding Elias in the back of the room. "We didn't know who Director Thorne was. But that isn't the real issue. The issue is that we stopped caring who any of you were. And that failure rests with me." A few murmurs, a few hesitant nods rippled through the crowd. "We are going to reopen every dismissed complaint," he continued. "We will work with federal oversight, and anyone found to be part of this pattern of misconduct will be held accountable. That includes me." A woman near the front shouted, "Talk is cheap, Sheriff." Marcus nodded. "Then hold me to it." Elias said nothing, but Ava glanced at him. "Do you believe him?" "I believe this room," Elias replied. After the meeting, people lingered outside, talking in small, energized groups. The problem wasn't solved, not by a long shot, but something had cracked open. And once broken open, it could never be sealed shut again. But accountability is meaningless without consequence, and Elias had one final meeting to ensure that part of the equation was not forgotten. On Monday morning, Elias ascended the steps of City Hall, a single file in one hand, a cup of coffee in the other. He was scheduled for a closed-door meeting with Mayor Thorne, But when he was shown into the conference room, two other people were already seated at the table. Eva Rostova, now officially designated as the department's liaison for federal oversight, and Isla Reyes, a folder of her own resting on the polished table before her. The mayor looked up, a strained smile on his face. "Director Thorne, I wasn't expecting such a large delegation." Elias did not return the smile. He opened his file and placed it squarely in the center of the table. "These are our preliminary findings," he stated. 5 confirmed violations of departmental policy, 3 documented cases of falsified reports, 2 separate incidents of body camera tampering, and 1 active attempt to obstruct a federal investigation. The mayor's hands tensed. "Are you recommending criminal prosecution?" Elias didn't answer right away. He glanced at Isla, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "We are recommending a full and immediate personnel audit," Isla said, "and the termination of Officer Corbin Vance." The mayor took a sharp breath. "You're asking me to fire one of my most senior officers. We're asking you to restore faith in a system that has been fundamentally broken for far too long," Elias countered. Eva leaned forward. "We're also asking you to make a choice, Mayor. You can either protect the man who buried complaints and doctored official reports, or you can stand with the community that just publicly demanded change." The mayor stared at the tabletop. The easy exits all sealed off. No carefully worded press release could fix this. No quiet suspension would quell the outrage that had finally found its voice. He eventually gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I will draft the termination letter this afternoon." Elias closed his file and stood. "We will be monitoring your compliance. Any further obstruction or delay will be escalated directly to the Bureau." The meeting concluded without fanfare, but its gravity remained. As Elias stepped back outside, he didn't head for his car. He took a slow walk through the town square. People were milling about, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. At one corner, he saw a group of high school students. One of them, a young man in a blue hoodie, met his eyes and gave a small, quick nod. It was just a simple gesture, but it was different from the looks of fear or suspicion he had seen before. This nod held something new: recognition, respect. Elias returned the gesture and continued on his way. Back at the department, Officer Vance was summoned to the sheriff's office. There were no arguments, no debates. Just a single sheet of paper signed by the mayor marked "effective immediately." Vance didn't shout. He didn't protest. He just stared at the letter, then at the sheriff. "So that's it?" Marcus looked up from his desk. "Do you think it shouldn't be?" Vance's voice was tight. "I did what I thought was right. I didn't know." "You didn't care," Marcus corrected him. "And that's the part that cost you everything." Vance left through a side door. No one saw him again that day. Eva stood in the hallway watching the subtle shifts in the department's ecosystem. Some faces showed relief, others barely concealed bitterness. But the change was underway, quiet and inexorable. Elias returned that evening to begin the final phase: a meeting with the mayor, the sheriff, and 2 DOJ representatives to begin drafting entirely new departmental protocols. Mandatory performance reviews, independent body cam audits, a community-led reporting system. There was no applause. No banners were hung. But the real arduous work had finally begun. Outside, as the sun bled across the rooftops, Elias made one last call. His voice was weary but firm. "Send me the next location," he said. There was a brief pause on the line. "Already?" "Yes," Elias replied. "Already." But before he packed his bags and drove away, he sat for a moment in the quiet of his car, thinking not about the title on his credentials, but about how frighteningly easy it was for people to forget that respect has nothing to do with a uniform, or the car you drive, or whether you travel with an entourage. It is about what you do when you believe no one of consequence is watching. It's about the person you choose to be when the world has already made its assumptions about you. Sometimes the most important lesson is not found in the noise, but in the quality of the silence that comes after. It's in the way a room's atmosphere shifts when the laughter dies. It's in the way an entire town holds its breath after years of pretending everything was fine. Elias didn't need to make a grand speech. He had no interest in seeing his name in the headlines. What mattered was exposing what people did when they were certain they would never be called to account for it. Back in his motel room, he sat on the edge of the bed, his shoes still on, his phone vibrating with messages from DC. He silenced it. He just needed a quiet moment to reconnect with why this work still mattered after all these years. It was never about seeking justice for himself. It was for all the others who didn't have a badge in their pocket. For the teenager walking home from practice who couldn't understand why he was being forced to empty his backpack onto the sidewalk. For the young mother who had to watch her toddler cry in the back seat while an officer searched her trunk for no reason. For the old man who never told a soul about being pinned to the hood of his car in 1989 for failing to come to a complete stop. None of them had the power to say, "I work for the FBI." None of them had a hidden recorder. They just went home. Or in some cases, they didn't. What Elias had done in that courtroom wasn't an act of power. It was an act of purpose. Quietly, precisely, and without a trace of ego. Respect doesn't have to be demanded loudly. It doesn't come from a title or a uniform. It comes from the fundamental choice to see another person's humanity before you assign them a value. The men in that courtroom laughed at Elias because of how he looked and what they assumed he was. But that moment did not define him. It defined them. And the investigation that followed was not just an investigation. It was a mirror held up to a department, to a town, and to a system. You don't fix what's broken by pretending it's whole. You fix it by finally listening to the stories you've spent years ignoring, by holding people accountable for their actions, and by refusing to let another name be dismissed and filed away as unfounded. So if you have ever been underestimated, remember this: your quiet is not a weakness, and your calm is not a surrender. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one who says the least. And if you ever find yourself in a position to speak up, for yourself or for someone who cannot, remember that a badge does not make the man. The action does. Elias Thorne was not a hero. He didn't need to be one. He just needed to do his job with integrity and with purpose. And perhaps, in a world that so often forgets what that looks like, that is more than enough. If this story resonated with you, even in a small way, don't let its impact end here. Share it, discuss it, ask the hard questions, hold your own community to a higher standard. And if you haven't done so already, click that subscribe button. Because stories like this one are not just fiction, they are reminders, and we all need more of them.